find that most of the time, the best life lessons come from those who have lived it to the fullest. And I've got one guy who fits that bill to a T. I'm so excited to have Craig Beaver join us on today's route. Just moments before he heads into retirement after an illustrious career spanning 4 decades and 2 industries. But first, let me quickly thank the sponsor of the route, IC Bus. The next generation is here and is the head of its class. Let's get rolling. When we spoke, Craig Beaver was just finishing his service as Transportation Director for Beaverton School District in Oregon. He's been one of those guys that people just seem to talk about, and I mean that in the best way. Craig is an early adopter of many alternative fuels, and that's what first put him on our radar. Since then, he's been a constant source of information and inspiration, so I just had to share our conversation with you too. I check in with Craig to talk about everything from driver shortages and company culture to navigating change, electric buses, AI, and the leadership lessons that he's learned the hard way. So let's get into it. Here's Craig. Just announced your retirement, effective June 30th this year. So how long have you been in your district now, and what's been your experience leading up to this point?
Well, yes, I've been in Beaverton District for Beaverton School District for 11 years, and prior to that, I was in California in San Diego, and I spent 15 years as a director at a high school district down there. And then prior to that, I spent 17 years working for a trucking company as a manager and an engineer and a supervisor. So 42 or 43 years altogether in transportation, my entire career. Prior to that, I was in college, went to college, graduated from college.
Yeah, that's a good run. Congratulations. Is there a successor named for your position, or what's the plan?
Not yet. The position was posted right around spring break, so the end of March, and I understand they're going to do interviews in mid to late May, and they'll name somebody by the beginning of June, and
Okay.
hopefully we'll have some time to work, at least do a small turnover.
Yeah, that's always good to train with someone, and you leave some big shoes to fill. So we look forward to seeing who steps in.
You're so kind.
Let's go back again just a little bit now. You have a background in trucking that you've transferred to school busing. How did that early career shape what you do now?
You know, Roadway Express was a company. They're no longer in business. They taught me so many things about how to manage people, how to execute efficiently and cost effective. Cost control is just a mantra, and being efficient and working with diverse work groups. They were unionized, the Teamsters Union, so it taught me, how to deal with people and deploy resources. As a terminal manager, I was responsible for the entire operation, the profit and the loss. So when I came into the school bus business, well, certainly it's not a profitable operation, but I worked very hard to apply the same principles to the school bus business, and we were real successful. We were able to, improve efficiencies and really focus on costs and things like that. All the things, the good steward of public money would do. And I learned a very strong work ethic, and being safety first, obviously, and being just really getting involved in every detail, and really making sure every detail was taken care of, and trying to think in advance and pre-plan events that could happen. And so it was a different aspect. It's certainly a different aspect for the folks in San Diego. And we all got to know each other pretty well and work through those. It's certainly a different workforce with school bus drivers versus truck drivers and dock workers, and so it took a little bit of adjustment for all of us. But we were fortunate. We had a very large field trip program, and we were able to do a lot of outside business and bring revenue in from the outside, both doing services for other districts and working on other district vehicles and fire trucks and emergency vehicles. And so I was able to bring all of those experiences up here to Beaverton. I was, again, very fortunate that I was able to learn, the nuts and bolts of the special ed transportation, which I really didn't know. The regular ed side wasn't too bad, kind of like a transit system, right? Wasn't too difficult or too different from what we did in the trucking business. Special ed however, was certainly a lot different. And California, as you probably well know, California has got a robust special ed program down there and a lot of challenges. We saw the introduction of the McKinney-Vento legislation, and we worked through all those things. So I started there in 2001 and left in 2015. So we had quite a run. Economically, a lot of fun things happened during that time period, and so I was able to bring that up to Beaverton, and it was just so refreshing. Beaverton was just so far advanced from anything I had seen. They really had some fine people that preceded me, and real good policies and processes in place, and would like to think that we just kind of built on that and streamlined things. The folks that were here, in fact, I just recently lost one of the supervisors that I inherited, and that's because he was promoted to a district that neighbors us as the administrator over there. So we've had just a real solid team, and just focused on hiring. I'd have to say that's probably our biggest thing. The thing that I learned in the trucking business was you never have enough people, and even if you think you have enough, you still don't. And I've applied that to San Diego, and we've kind of just put it on steroids here at Beaverton. So we're real fortunate. We don't really have a hiring problem anymore now. We're taking care of those issues.
So you're fully staffed up, no shortage right now?
Nope. About the last 2 years, we've been in excellent shape, actually.
Good work. What are your secrets? Is it company culture, benefits, recognition?
I think first and foremost, it's got to be the culture. The folks in charge really have to want to make the right environment. I mean, we work very hard to treat people, respectfully, and to try and work with them as much as possible. Life happens, things come up and happen, people, and you need to be, we need to be flexible enough to adjust to those things. And that starts with staffing. Most of the time, just every supervisor or manager I've ever met wants to be able to accommodate his folks, but he can't, because he or she can't, because they're restricted by staff or equipment. It's important to have that staffing so that you're able to accommodate those things that pop up. That's really been the key to it. But then again, as well you say, we work real hard to try and promote a familial atmosphere, whether it be raffles and giveaways, whether it be potlucks, recognizing people, and going out of our way. I know one of the most important things I think that I ever did was to get my commercial license when I went to work in San Diego for the school district. I went through the training program, and I did it more so at the time to see what the training program looked like for the new employees that we were hiring.
Okay.
And then when I came to Oregon, when I came up here, all I had to do was convert my license, but instead I went through the program here at Beaverton again so that I could see what we were teaching our people. And then getting out and driving, just whether I had to or not. Sometimes I had to, and other times I just chose to go out. And I think I've made more changes around things I've seen while I've driven routes than anything else. I mean, it may be as simple as adding more trash cans to the yard so that people don't have to walk as far, right? Or putting a porta potty into a parking lot at a school that is really a long walk to get to the restrooms, before the drivers have to pick up the kids. I mean, things like that is really, so you talk about promoting morale, drivers see that, and they appreciate that, right?
Yeah. Sometimes those little things are actually big things.
I will do double takes, and that I'm not quote unquote too good to drive, so to speak. When they love seeing the director out there, and it also gives me an opportunity to see people in their environment. When we pull up to a school, and we'll have 25 buses at a high school, let's say, and to pick up in the afternoon, and we'll pull up there and just start walking the row and saying hello, and just saying hello. People really appreciate that, and you get to hear a lot of things you don't get to hear sitting behind the desk here.
So throughout your career, what changes stand out the most to you as the industry has evolved over these decades?
The biggest thing, some of the biggest things, not the biggest, some of the biggest things, number one, obviously, is technology. I remember when I first started, diesel particulate filters were just coming in, right? And so we've gone through that whole process between DPFs to diesel emission fluid to propane to and the propane has improved to electric buses. So that part of the technology, the OEM part of the technology, and then the GPS. I remember when we first got GPS, and then I remember when we could see it on a screen and get live real time, and then cameras, internal cameras, and things like that, and then the routing software. I mean, I can remember when we used to use Google Maps and do it that way, and now we're into AI-assisted routing software and things like that. So those are just some of the tremendous improvements that have been made, and I'm really excited for what's coming with AI. I think we've just started to scratch the surface here at Beaverton with it, and I'm really excited to see what's going to happen. We're starting to write prompts and asking AI to write the prompts for us, and we're really starting to see that, and there's just so many things that can be used. I think there's so many more things that we haven't even thought of yet from a routing standpoint that's going to open up things for us. And we're doing a lot of things at Beaverton with dual language programs. We're adding, not just Spanish, but we have Mandarin Chinese that we're doing, and we have, we speak 106 different languages here. We're doing a lot of stuff with CTE now, right? With high school kids learning trades, right? That's really taken off here. We've tripled or quadrupled our programs just in the last 2 or 4 years here. Okay. And so as a transportation department, we're being asked to service all those things, yet we're not adding buses and we're not adding drivers. So we have to find new efficiencies.
Right.
The next time they do bell schedules, I can almost hardly wait for them to do bell schedules with AI. What I had to do 5 years ago by hand, and it took me 3 months to do, for 25,000, well, there's 40,000 kids in the district, but 25,000 kids that we transport, it took me 3 months to do by hand, basically. They should be able to do probably in a week with AI. And so things like that we can only guess how good it could be. So those are some of the things that I think are the biggest, and they're exciting. I really think they're going to be exciting things.
Yeah, they are. Things are changing faster than ever, it seems.
Yeah. Boy, we like to say with the electric buses here, we like to say we're beyond the cutting edge. We're on the hemorrhaging edge of it. We have so many. We're running. Again, right now today we're running 86 electric buses, but in the next 40 days we'll have 100 electric buses on the street, and over 100, 110 chargers, and so all different OEMs, both in the chargers, the buses, and all the different things that happen. We've got Geotab, we've got HAMS tracking, we've got IC bus tracking, we've got all these different things that we're trying to put together and make all work at once. And so I think it would be nice it'd be nice for things to settle down a little bit. Let's just get used to something for a little while. But but here at Beaverton, we're used to change. That's kind of our middle name. We just kind of roll with it and make it work. And the people I have are just beyond words, because they're the ones that really execute it. They give me the time in order to think this stuff up from a strategic standpoint, but they're the tactical arm of the operation. They're the ones that are implementing it and making it work.
Yeah, you just mentioned change, and I want to ask you, what are your tips for making sure that change is successful? It's change management is kind of an art in itself. So how have you found success?
The most successful implementations for me involve getting my folks involved, and by my folks I mean dispatchers, drivers, mechanics. We, especially coming into an established operation, I learned something at Roadway back in the 90s. It was the development of the quality system in the Malcolm Aldridge ward, and so we were really big on CAT teams, corrective action teams, and things like that, and the different models. And I've forgotten the names of all the models, I can remember one, I forgot the name of it, but it's like, if we want this to fail, what should we do? And we'd list out all the ways we could possibly make it fail. The idea being, okay, let's not do those things, right? And that was one way of doing it. And there's all different models, but one of the biggest things we learned was the CAT team. And people looked at me and they didn't know what the heck I was talking about when I said, we're going to have a CAT team on that. And for example, it's something as simple as snow routes, right? It was time to look at the snow zones. So instead of the dispatchers and the routers, I said, let's get 6 or 7 drivers together. Let's get a dispatcher and a router, stick them in a room, go figure it out, 2 or 3 meetings, and come back. It was one of the most well implemented changes they had made in quite some time, because we got the people that knew in there, the drivers saying, no, 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 that's not what it's like up there. It's this way. So that, getting folks involved, when we went to do electric buses, we went out and as much as we could, because again, 5 years ago it was still kind of a concept to everybody, but we did listen to the dispatch or to the mechanics and see what was important for them, as far as being able to work on them, what were their concerns, and somewhat with the drivers. And again, there's some things where we just kind of said, here we're going to do it, we're going to train you as best as we know, but there comes a point where as a boss, you got to when in charge, take charge. You got to make that decision, that strategic decision to move that way. But then to make it successful, make sure that we supplied in the training, the required amount of training that was going to be needed, and foresee that, and listen to people when they said they weren't getting it. Something as simple as going out and having a sitting down with the trainers and having the driver go through and just become familiar with the new dashboard, right? Because we heard people who kept saying, I know this is confusing me. I don't know where to look to this. I'm used to looking over here for this button, and it's really over here. And so, we went back to the trainers and said, let's make a proficiency, thing for them where we can go out and we've got a checklist that we know where everything is at. And it sounds real simple, but again, it was new. Nobody had really done it, for that kind of bus and things like that. So again, it just comes back to listening to the people that have to implement it and use it. Those are the most successful things. And then really knowing the subject, right? Becoming, if you can't become a subject matter expert, at least consult with the people that are, right? So that, I've always told people, I may not have an answer for you, but I'll get it, and I don't promise that you're going to like the answer, but we'll find the answer for you. And that's really key. And then doing it, right? Then actually going back to people and say, hey, you remember you asked me about this? Well, it took me 3 weeks, but here's the answer to that, and unfortunately we can't do it because of this, but the bus won't do that, right? And things like that. So, but again, taking ownership of it and just I try and put myself in the place of the drivers or the dispatchers or the mechanics, whoever that is, to say, if I were in that position, what would I want? What do I need? And that's what we talk about as a management team. If we're sitting in that thing, what do we need? What would we like to see? And then we try and make that happen and follow up, right? We always follow up with them, and just, again, we talk about when you're out driving, you're talking, I walk by and say, how are things going? Fine. No, really, how are things going?
Right.
How's this bus working for you? What makes you mad on this route? And going just a little bit beneath the surface is real helpful.
Well, and that's another reason that, you making time to go out and drive routes now and then kind of helps keep you fresh on how do these buses actually run? What is it like to manage these kids? All these factors that sometimes you might forget about behind the desk.
Well, it certainly gives you empathy when a parent calls because the driver yelled, quote unquote, at their child, which when you look at the video, it's the driver got on the PA and said, hey, I need you to sit down back there, okay? Right? And that turned into the driver screamed at me in my face, right? So you have empathy anyway, right? You understand there's always two sides of a story, especially with student management, right? And so when a driver, and even, a driver, as much as I hate to say, they hit they back into a pole, and you think, how in God's name could you do that? But by driving in that school that you got to give yourself room to get it right, to make that right turn type of thing, and it doesn't take away that they made a mistake, but at least you have a little bit of empathy, and you can understand and turn it not just into maybe a disciplinary session, but also a coaching session, right? You've been there, you've done that, you understand what happened, and this is what you need to do next time.
Right. Yeah, to show you really understand what they're going through. So, what sticks out to you as some of your biggest successes so far? What are you most proud of?
Well, here at Beaverton, honestly, one of the things I'm most proud of is that, number one, our drivers have won the statewide driving championship for 3 out of the last 4 years. And last year we had not just the national winner, we had the international winner in small type C. So, I'm really proud of that because we put a lot of effort into safety and training here, and I've really beefed up, we've really beefed up the training department since I've been here, and really made them able to train every day instead of driver route and stick some training in there. So that's one of the things I'm most proud of. I'm most proud of that, with 280 drivers, we really only lose about 20 a year or so. The turnover is only about 20 or 25 a year.
Good.
We don't have a mass accidents. And when you look at that 20 or 25 years, because the average age of our folks is about 58, this is either their second or their third career usually when they come here. So we have a natural attrition of people like me that they get into their mid 60s and early 70s and decide, okay, it's time to go to take Social Security and do that. So that's most of what that attrition is people that have finally retired, for life now. So I'm pretty proud of that as well.
Yeah.
I'm proud that we've been able to implement, 100 electric school buses and everything that goes with it, and 78 propane buses, and that we're running, 100%, we're basically not using any petroleum-based fuel. We use R99 renewable diesel, and we use renewable propane. So I'm super proud of everybody's involvement, the drivers being able to make that work, and the mechanics, and our suppliers that have been able to work with us to get to us to a point where we're making a minimal carbon footprint. Every one of the 100 buses, the 86 today and the 100 buses eventually serves as a Title I school. So the kids that need those, benefit the most from it are getting getting those buses that live in the high density areas and things like that. They're getting electric buses. They're getting propane buses. All special needs kids, we will have eliminated all our diesel buses from our special needs operation. They'll either be propane or electric. Those are the kinds of things that really make me proud. We've been able to really service our customers and make this a place that our drivers want to come and work at. It's not always roses here, certainly. We have 340 people that work here. We always have issues, but at least we know that we respect each other and that we can agree to disagree in most parts. And I'm especially proud that we have an astounding relationship with the union association here. With the union, we meet with them every month. And it's, hey, what's going on? And we talk about hiring, and usually it's, if there's anything, they're usually minor things, and I think that's because we are really engaged with our employees, and we have a strong communication with the union leadership, and we're able to head off a lot of issues. So I'm really, really proud of that. We have, very, very few grievances in the last 11 years here. I mean, like less than one hand's worth, and I'm very proud of that because we've been able to work through those problems as a team with them.
What lessons, if any, have you learned the hard way? Is there any advice you can impart to save someone else?
Well, on a personal level, to not say the first thing that comes to my mind, to take a breath. Don't press send when you type that email first. Make sure you sit back and think about it for 24 hours. Those are some of the hard lessons I've learned. Jumping to conclusions, thinking that I know the answer, right? Thinking I know what the situation is before I really do. And again, that comes from maturity and reflection and asking questions, basically saying, tell me what I don't know here. What am I missing here? One of the lessons I learned, early on was that I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and that to ask other people, when I have a problem that I'm not sure, to say, well, what do you think? And then to have the courage to say, you know what, you're right, I'm wrong, let's do it your way, after decisions been made. Believe me, that's taken a lot of maturity and a lot of hard knocks to do that. And you know what, and again, it goes back to just being a good leader and knowing when you don't have the answers, and being able to have the humility to say, I know I don't have the answers. That's the advice I would give to people is, when in charge, take charge. Listen to as much information as you can, but when you have to make a decision, make the decision. But if it's the wrong one, don't be afraid to change your decision and give the credit where the credit's due. I've come up in the old school of they did a good job, we did a good job, I made a mistake, right? If something goes wrong, my name's on the door, right? I'm the captain of the ship. It's I must have done something that didn't prepare people sufficiently because they made that mistake. But if they executed it, that's because they took something and they ran with it, and that's true. It really is true that way, right?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of leader you have to be, and that's what I would. That's what I learned, and that's what I would hand off to whoever, whether they takes this seat or they're a first-time supervisor, 21-year-old supervisor somewhere.
Good advice.
You've mentioned your use of EVs, propane, early adopters of a lot of these alternative fuels. So what has been your experience in that? What have you learned, and what can you advise others who are still kind of testing the waters, especially in this climate right now?
Well, the first thing I would say, and this could be a surprise to some people, is that we run 100 electric buses. It's 1/3 of our 300 plus fleet, but electric isn't the 100% answer. It is definitely a use case thing, right? I am a ginormous proponent of propane. I've spoken, in support of propane on a national level, on a national and a state level. I think it's an outstanding alternative. I think it gets us 95% of the way from a carbon footprint standpoint. It's a lot from an infrastructure standpoint. It's just so much easier. And with state and national contracts, they're virtually, the infrastructure is virtually cost-free. I think I pay $1 a year to rent a 1,000-gallon tank.
Nice.
Type of thing, because it's on a state contract. And the technology with it, granted, there's only one OEM right now that made it, but when there were two, we had both of them. We had International as well as Beaver. When International was still using the PSI motor, we had those. And I think it's a great alternative to diesel. The only thing, and believe me, the folks at Bluebird have heard me for the last 7 or 8 years on this. I would love to see them come out with a Type D propane bus, an 84 passenger Type D. Right now, the biggest bus I think you can get is a 78 passenger Type C, and unfortunately, it's just not big enough for us to use. We need the 84, but in a lot of places it is big enough, and I would say, use it. It's got the horsepower. So propane is a huge thing. Again, electric, it's a little harder now in this day and age than it was, say, 4 years ago or 3 years ago, but it's still there. I think there's a lot of people still that are implementing it now, just not at the scale that they originally thought they were going to. But we're living proof. I mean, we're about ready. We've already done a 6-month V2G pilot. It was successful, and we are in the process of powering up to be able to do that consistently now with our utility.
Okay.
It is possible. It works. And again, for electric, a lot of things have to be right. It has to be, the right kind of operation, the right kind of route. You have to have the right kind of technical support, both from working on it and also from the OEM. So, but and then the last thing is, again, the renewables. It's a lot more prevalent than when it was. I mean, when we first started using renewable, we had to get it trucked in from a different part of the state because it wasn't even being delivered into Portland on the pipeline. It had to be trucked in. Well, that's changed, and now it's a lot more prevalent. And I think, depending where you are, certainly California, New York, Chicago, Detroit, I'm sure these big areas have access to it. It might be a little bit harder to get it in Omaha or in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, because of where they're at. But I think, if you really want it and you tell your vendor, I think, you can get there and you can get that eventually. And I tell you, it runs cleaner, it's easier. There's less maintenance with it because it fouls engines less. It's not biodiesel. And it has a tremendous effect from a carbon footprint standpoint. And realistically, as it becomes more prevalent, pricing comes down on it. It becomes a lot more economical.
Right. Now, as you start to wrap up your career and you look at the next generation of leaders, what advice do you have for them?
I think the next leader really needs to, well, number one, you always have to care about people, right, and their well-being. You have to put your employees first and do whatever you can to make them successful. That's what your job is to do whatever it takes to make them successful. But I also think beyond that, I think having a good understanding of technology is going to be just critical. Everything so much now is computer-based and web-based, routing, cameras, all that stuff, and you're going to have a really good grasp of that. And I think there's no substitute for, again, going out and being able to drive a bus and seeing it out there. But again, it's just talking to people, listening, and then having courage to try new things. I think that's really important too. There's a saying I heard many years ago. You know, they were talking about the guys in the 82nd Airborne that had to jump out of the planes and behind enemy lines, and you know they were scared to death, but they did it anyway. That's courage. You know, just kind of. You know, I got to do this anyway, and sometimes that's what it comes to. Again, this isn't World War II, and nobody's asking them to jump out of an airplane, but sometimes it feels like that, having the courage to go in front of a board that may not be attuned to having, you know, climate friendly policies, and having the courage to get up there and make that presentation, even if the answer is going to be no, get out of here. It takes courage to do that, right? Or standing up in front of defending, you know, a driver to a principal or a parent because, you know, they've misinterpreted or they're asking for something that's a little bit outlandish. Having the courage to do that. I can't tell people how important it is to have the courage to do things like that when it's needed. And having the courage, you know, to tell a driver, no, this is how we're going to do it. I know you see it that way, but this, you don't see the whole picture, and this is what we're going to have to do, and having the courage to do that. So, you know, having courage and resilience is equally as strong.
Yeah, good qualities of any leader.
Good qualities for life, right?
Absolutely. Yes, for a human.
Just be kind, right? Be kind and be generous. That's what I would say as a leader. Be kind and be generous.
Yeah. What are your wishes for the future of the industry?
My wish is for funding, for full funding. And I know that'll never come true, but I hope that school boards continue to understand that transportation is a priority, getting kids to school is a priority, and that it isn't, you know, it doesn't directly fund the teacher in the classroom, but it's just as important. And because everybody knows across the whole spectrum how important the school bus driver is, and that the student getting to school safely and in the right frame of mind so that they can participate in lunch or in breakfast, right? That was one of our key things, change the bell schedule to give us the opportunity for kids to get to school at least 15 minutes early to have breakfast for everybody that needs it, right? And that's part of transportation, you know, and that's why, you know, sometimes we wag the tail with the bell schedules, because so that we can do that, right? The tail wags the dog, so to speak. Wish is that for people to truly understand and embrace that as much as they can, and to be able to budget as much as they can to make those things possible. You know, there's never enough money for anything. We all know that. And so we all have to go without, but we need to, you know, be able to find, you know, a medium. And I also, you know, hope that we continue to make, the OEMs continue to make strides technologically to make it more cost effective to own and operate electric vehicles from propane vehicles, and we make, you know, diesels cleaner, that we're able to come up with a motor that is going to meet the 2027 diesel standards and things like that, you know, so that everybody does their part. So not much, I just want everything.
Dream big. So you were, let's see, 2 months away from retirement as we speak today. What are your plans? What's next?
Wow. For me, after 40-something years, I am going to take a deep breath. I have a wonderful wife. We'll be married 38 years this year, and a beautiful daughter and a son-in-law. And I have 2 grand dogs I'm real happy about. My wife and I are going to travel, you know, to Europe and do some cruises. I'm going to, you know, it sounds funny, but one of the things I'm most looking forward to is being able to get back and go to the gym at 11 o'clock in the morning when nobody's around, you know, and not have to worry about the rush and things like that. Reading, I've done a lot more reading, but I'm really looking forward to being able to sit back and read, you know, and just really spend the rest of my time that I have with my wife and my family.
Yeah.
You know, I've been working, you know, 11 or 12 hours or more a day for my entire career.
That's a lot.
And I'm really looking forward to just being able to take a deep breath and traveling and paying back what everybody has loaned me for the last 42 or 43 years. So,
well, you've certainly had a very successful and fruitful career, so it's been worth it. I hope you think. We do.
I've been very, very fortunate. I've had some fantastic mentors and people that taught me things. And you know, I tell people whenever I hear steal blindly from us and call it your own if that's what you need to do. But we're all in this together. You know, we're all really a rising tide does lift all boats. I really believe that in this business, and everybody I've ever run into in this business has felt that way. You know, we're all sitting on top of somebody else's shoulders, and we expect to hold somebody else up above our shoulders.
Well, we all have the same goal. All right, any closing thoughts?
I just want to thank you and thank everybody that's been so kind to me. I don't take recognition well. I get very embarrassed and I don't know what to say. And my wife has told me just to say, be quiet and say thank you. And I really appreciate what's come to me. And I would just say it's a reflection of all the people that have put us in a position to be able to be this successful, and me personally. And I just want to say thank you to everybody and thank you very much.
Amazing. Well, you know, the thanks goes back to you too. You've done quite a bit to shape who the industry has become, and I know you've guided lots of other leaders, so thank you, Craig.
Thank you again to Craig for everything he's done for the industry and for magazines like us. Hopefully his story resonated with you too. We'll be sure to bring you even more leadership insights from leading figures in the industry going forward. In the meantime, find more school bus headlines and hot topics on our website. Be sure to follow our YouTube channel and connect with us on social media. Another big thank you again to our sponsor of the route, IC Bus, proudly offering vehicles and solutions that are ahead of its class. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for riding with us.